All right. Hello, and welcome everyone to our webinar. We are so glad that you could be joining us today. My name is Stephanie, and I will be one of your co-hosts. Now, today's webinar is a part of our larger BrainHQ Academy series of webinars, where we talk about the neuroscience behind different topics. Today's topic is Clever Creatures, a look into animal intelligence. Let's take a look at the agenda for today. All right, so shortly after the agenda wraps up, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. Now, when the poll is launched, you should see a new window pop up on your screen where you can submit your answer. It's just going to be one question, so it shouldn't take too long for you all to answer. And I will also enable the chat function, so that way if you have any extra comments or stories you'd like to share that relate to that poll question, you are able to write in. Following that poll, we are going to be joined by Dr. Henry Mahncke, who is giving our primary presentation today. Henry, for those of you who haven't seen one of Henry's webinars before, earned his PhD in neuroscience at the University of California, San Francisco, where he studied brain plasticity with our co-founder, Dr. Michael Merzenich. He has been the CEO of Posit Science here since 2011. Then Henry will be joined in conversation with Midori Williams, who we are very excited to have joining us today. Midori Williams is a certified professional dog trainer via the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers, or CCPDT for short. They were formerly a behavior trainer for the San Francisco SPCA, where they worked with both dogs and cats, but now they are an independent certified fear-free dog trainer, walker, and pet sitter here in the Bay Area. So we're very excited to have them joining us today. Following that discussion, we are going to open up to a live Q&A. So if at any point during the presentation today you'd like to ask a question, click on the Q&A button on the Zoom control panel and a new window will pop up where you can type in your questions. We are going to do our best to answer as many questions as we can, but there are a lot more of you in the audience than there are us. So we likely aren't going to be able to answer every single question today, and for that we apologize. The other thing that I wanted to note is that today's webinar is being recorded and it will get posted to our YouTube channel in the coming days. If you'd like to be notified when that video goes live, you can head on over to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/brainhq and subscribe there. And when that video gets posted next week, you should automatically receive an email letting you know of that. I am going to go ahead and toss it over to Henry, who can now take over the screen share and begin his presentation on clever creatures.
You know, that's a very loaded word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. If you ask two cognitive scientists to define intelligence, you might get three different definitions. But for the purposes of our chat today, I think we're going to focus on three ideas. We're going to focus on the idea that intelligence means that you are acting purposefully and rationally. You have a goal and you are making progress towards that goal following a system of rules or at least coherent beliefs. We're going to talk about goal-directed adaptive behavior, kind of a similar definition that overlaps a little bit. This is the idea that you have something you are trying to get to in this world, and you are changing behavior in order to try and get to that goal if you encounter an obstacle. And again, a third related definition is demonstrating problem solving, right? You encounter an obstacle towards your goal and you do something clever, as the title of this webinar, to get around that problem and achieve your goal. And the overlap of these definitions, I would say, is what we generally mean by this slightly slippery concept of intelligence. And we're going to talk about this applied to a bunch of different animals here. We're going to talk very briefly about people, not too much, because we're already pretty familiar as people with what intelligence means for people. But we're also going to talk about chimpanzees and apes, our closest relatives. We'll talk a little bit about elephants. We're going to chat about getting further afield. We're going to talk about birds, crows, and parrots in particular. Moving into the ocean, we'll talk about whales, as Midori mentioned, and dolphins. And finally, we're going to talk about the most odd character of all of here, the octopus. So let's dive in. So let's first say, hey, what do we mean by human intelligence, if we may? And then what can we use to think then about animal intelligence? Well, with human intelligence, we might think about a couple of different things. We first might think about technology and tool use. We have the idea that a key aspect of human intelligence is our ability to make and use tools Because we can do that, we get control over the environment, and we can use our knowledge to change what's going to happen in the future by building tools that allow us to affect the world around us. We'll talk about whether there are examples of animals that can use tools to do that as well. We might also talk about art, where we have the idea of intelligence as creativity, right? The expression of an inner voice that we might have from our brain and our spirit that we can then express in the outer world by creating art. And finally, we're going to talk about language as an idea of human intelligence. It seems really important to our aspect of being human that we can communicate with each other. We can express ideas and other people can understand them. And then as a result, we can work together to accomplish big, complex goals. And we'll talk about, hey, are there animals that seem to have these abilities as well? So with that in mind, let's talk about our first wonderful example of intelligence and in the animal world. And we're going to get to that by asking the question, hey, why would we think animals might be intelligent at all? Well, I'm a neuroscientist, so I'm going to start with brains. And, often you may have heard, and certainly I was taught when I was young, that humans have exceptionally large brains. And here's a human brain right in the center here. And that explains why we're so intelligent. That explains kind of what we're at the top of the animal kingdom, one might say. And it's true, we have an awfully big brain. But here's a gorilla's brain, and it's actually not that much smaller than a human's brain. So we might expect pretty intelligent behavior from a gorilla. Here's a dog and a cat brain, and they do get a little bit smaller, but we'll talk about what dogs and cats can do with Midori. But here's some pretty interesting examples. If we think that big brains are really important for intelligence, well, down here, here's an elephant brain, and you can see it's simply enormous. The front part of the elephant brain here is almost as big as a whole human brain, and the part back here called the cerebellum, which is smaller in the humans and bigger in the elephants, is quite large as well. So, you look at an elephant brain and you think, well, they might be quite intelligent. And then just take even a further step back here, this is the brain of a whale, and a sperm whale in particular. And of course, a sperm whale is simply an enormous animal, right? Much bigger than a city bus. But coming along with it is this absolutely gigantic brain. And again, if we think that brains are related to intelligence, which it kind of seems like should be true, maybe we should expect that whales and sperm whales in particular are enormously intelligent. So what do we see when we actually look into the world? What do we see when we study animal behavior? So let's start with our friends, the apes. And I want to talk about a very specific example here to kick us off, which is tool use. So what do scientists mean by tool use? Well, here's a picture of a human using a tool, taking a hammer to hammer a nail. And what scientists really mean by tool use is that a tool is an external object, like a hammer, that's selected and shaped for a specific purpose. In this case, hey, we've designed it to hammer nails. And then we use that tool to change the environment to achieve a goal. In this case, we use the tool to hammer that nail in and maybe build a house. So for a long, long time, in fact, I think through most of human history, people thought that tool use was unique to humans. And in many ways, we thought, well, hey, this is the distinguishing factor of being a human. A human is a tool-using animal. But then in 1960, there was a scientist named Jane Goodall who was studying chimpanzees in the wild in Africa, and she made simply an astonishing discovery. She discovered that chimpanzees could use sticks and select those sticks for their shape and actually modify those sticks to strip them of leaves, and these chimpanzees would use those sticks to pull termites out of holes to eat. So I have a video of this, and we're going to swap to here. And Stephanie, you should see my YouTube image here. And let's watch this chimpanzee. And what they're going to do is you can see a stick very faintly down here in this image. And this chimpanzee is going to be using it to pull termites out here to eat those termites. They're pulling the stick out and has a delicious meal of termites, pushes the stick back in, wiggles it around a little bit, pulls it back out, eats those termites again. This is a fantastic, delicious meal for this chimpanzee. You and I might prefer something else. We might use a fork to eat some spaghetti instead. But unquestionably, after seeing this, it became clear that chimpanzees could use tools. And this was just a colossal breakthrough in our understanding of animal behavior and animal intelligence. And in fact, Richard Leakey, who was a scientist who'd been studying human evolution, who worked with Jane Goodall, said that after this discovery, he said, we must either redefine the word tool, we must redefine the word human, or we must accept chimpanzees as humans. And given those three options, what scientists did is really redefine human. We no longer think of humans as the only animal that can use tools because we've seen chimpanzees do it so clearly. How about another example from apes in general and monkeys and chimpanzees? How about language, right? Do apes use language or can they be taught to use language? Well, again, let's start with the definition. What is language? Well, that language has two key parts. It has the idea of what are called semantics. We have words, and words mean something in the world. But language has an additional component. It has syntax. What scientists mean by that is we can take words and we can put them in different orders to express different things, right? It means something different to say, I ate lunch today or lunch ate me today. Those are very different concepts, even though they have basically the same words. So when we think about animals using language, we ask both of those questions. Do they have words that have specific meanings? And can they combine those words to express new and different thoughts? Well, here's three examples across the history of studying language in monkeys and apes. On the left here, this adorable monkey is a vervet monkey, and they live in Africa. And a wonderful set of experiments were done by two scientists who actually spent months and months and even years in the field living close to and studying these vervet monkeys. And what they found for the first time was that these vervet monkeys have semantics. And in fact, if you watch these vervet monkeys, they make very different monkey calls for the idea of an eagle is approaching, or a snake is approaching, or a leopard is approaching. Now, you might wonder why those three things are so important, but I'll tell you why. Those are three things that like to eat a vervet monkey. So they're incredibly important for these monkeys to keep track of. And these scientists showed that these monkeys gave a specific call for eagle, snake, or leopard. And when other monkeys heard that call, they gave very specific behaviors. For example, if one monkey shouts out snake, the other monkeys stand up on their hind legs and they look around on the ground to see if they can find the snake. On the other hand, if a monkey calls eagle, the other monkeys rapidly go hide in a bush because they know they might be attacked from above. And finally, if one monkey calls leopard, the other monkeys often climb up a tree to get out of the way of the leopard. So this was really a first real showing that these monkeys have words that mean specific things. However, there wasn't really a lot of evidence these monkeys combined those words in different ways. So scientists didn't really quite call this language. Up here on the upper right, this fine young chimpanzee here is named Washoe. And you might be able to see that what Washoe is doing is using sign language. So this scientist here was at the University of Nevada, and she worked with Washoe. She raised him from just a baby chimp. And at the time, people had tried to teach chimpanzees to speak, just like I'm speaking now with their voices. But they rapidly learned that chimpanzee voice boxes aren't so good at making human sounds. And so the idea became, hey, let's see if we can teach chimpanzees sign language. And that was actually quite successful. Washoe learned more than 350 words from American Sign Language and could sign for all kinds of things that he wanted from scientists or wanted to communicate with scientists. So again, an incredible vocabulary, but not a lot of evidence that Washoe combined those words into new concepts. So Washoe had sign language to communicate the idea of semantics, what a word might mean, but perhaps wasn't using syntax as a language. And here's Coco, who you may have heard of, a very famous gorilla. Coco's actually from my hometown. She was raised here in the San Francisco Zoo, and she was adopted by a researcher from Stanford who, again, taught her sign language just like Washoe had been taught. And Coco also learned many, many different signs from American Sign Language. And there was some argument that maybe she was using those signs to combine into language, but it was very controversial in the field. And so most scientists at this point would say apes and monkeys are using sounds to refer to things in the real world. They have words, one might say, but they're perhaps not fully using language to explore new and different concepts. So let's keep going. How about beyond apes? What do we have next here? Let's talk about elephants. Now, why elephants? They're pretty different than us, but they have that huge brain like we saw with at the beginning. And of course, we've all heard the phrase, perhaps, they say an elephant never forgets. And that's probably best illustrated by this amazing story from an elephant sanctuary in the Midwest. And in this true story, this is from an article about the sanctuary, there was an elephant who had lived there for a long time named Jenny. And she became anxious when there was a new elephant who came to live at the sanctuary named Shirley. And the animals checked each other out. They kind of feel each other with their trunks, which are their equivalent really of a hand because they can reach out and manipulate things. And Shirley and Jenny both became animated, and it almost looked like they were old friends. The founder of the sanctuary said, hey, there was this euphoria, right? Shirley started bellowing, and then Jenny did too, and both trunks were checking each other out. So that human here, Buckley, the founder of the sanctuary, did some research, and it turned out that the two elephants had briefly crossed paths earlier. Jenny had performed at a traveling circus before coming to the sanctuary, and Shirley had been in the circus with Jenny for just a few months, but 23 years before they met again. And they clearly remembered each other. And I think that tells us something really interesting and exciting about animal intelligence, that these elephants learned who they were and had the idea of what an individual elephant was and could remember it 23 years later. But let's go a bit further. Let's come back to that idea of language. And it turns out elephants in the wild make two different kinds of sounds that might be a little bit like language, right? They make a classic trumpeting sound that maybe we've all had the idea of hearing. And this is used for like short distance communication. Elephants use it to sound alarms or alerts, like perhaps a lion is nearby. And they also make this trumpeting sound when they decide it's time to fight with each other. But there's a second very interesting sound they make called a rumbling, and this is almost too low for us to hear. But I'll play an example of it in just a moment. And with rumbling, they can communicate sounds for huge distances because their sounds are so low and they move through the earth and the environment. And just a few years ago, scientists started to realize that certain elephants would make certain rumbling sounds to refer to each other as if they had names. And I'm going to play one of those elephant names for you next. I believe it's right here. So you're going to see this elephant hear a recording that scientists made of a sound that they thought was her name. And let's hear it. Press play. Hear the sound in just a moment. And again, this is a recording. Sitting around, eating, minding her own business. And all of a sudden she hears, you hear that low rumbling sound, almost sounded like a growl. But as soon as she hears it, you can see her ears perk up and she starts to flap her ears like that. And it turns out that she mostly does that when she hears that specific sound as if it's her name. If she hears another sound, she doesn't respond in that way. And scientists actually used an artificial intelligence algorithm to identify just dozens of different, subtly different rumble sounds like this that they believe refer to specific names. So that's a pretty interesting linguistic ability from this big-brained elephant. Again, maybe not quite language the way humans use language, but a lot more advanced than I think we had ever thought elephants were before. So let's go even a little bit further afield. How about birds? Well, birds are pretty interesting from an intelligence perspective because their brains are really different than people's brains, right? And so the question that scientists have had for a long time is, hey, if an animal has a brain that's so different, can it exhibit intelligent behavior in some ways? Well, it turns out the answer is yes. So what we're going to look at now is a video of a crow. And in particular, this is a crow that turns out can use its intelligence to solve problems. So certain crows use tools in the wild, exactly like chimps. They actually get leaves and sticks and they use to dig them into areas and pull out different kinds of insects so the crow can eat them. But can a crow solve a problem that it's never really encountered before in the wild? Well, what we're going to watch this crow do is you see that in front of the crow here, and you'll see it more clearly when the video starts, there's two cylinders full of water. And in those cylinders are seeds, and the crow wants to have it, or a nut. But the seed is floating in water, and it's too low down for the crow to reach it with its beak. So let's see what this crow does to try and solve this problem. You see the crow reach down. She can't get that nut that she wants, but she's going to pick up this block and she puts it in the tube. And when she does that, you can see that as a result, the water moves up because the block is in the water. Turn this sound off, I think. And as the crow puts those blocks in, it makes the water come up, and then the crow is able to get the seed. And even more intelligently, this crow has a bunch of different choices it's making here, and it's picking larger, heavier objects to make the seed come up better. And here, I'll pause it for a moment. This crow has two choices. On the left, there's a seed floating on water, and on the right, there's a seed with sand that's holding it up. And the crow figures out and rapidly, or knows already, that it can't use a rock to elevate the sand. It can only use a rock to elevate the water. Here, let's watch her go. She's thinking, and she comes over here. She's going to put that rock in here to make that seed float up, and she's going to ignore the one with sand. So this goes on to show the crow actually doing all kinds of very clever things like that. But what it shows us remarkably is that these animals are able to use their intelligence to do things that we would consider quite advanced problem solving and quite advanced use of rationality. Just amazing. Now, how about language? Oops, let's go here. Let's pause that for a moment. I think many of us have come across the idea that parrots can be taught to mimic human language, right? People take, "Polly want a cracker," like a parrot has been taught to say. But it's not really language if you're just mimicking something. Can parrots actually be taught to use language? Well, there was a wonderful scientist named Irene Pepperberg who spent many, many years with African gray parrots, which are considered to be the most intelligent kind of parrot. And she trained one parrot named Alex in particular to use language in a very advanced way. So I'm going to play a video that was on PBS, and you'll see TV star Alan Alda talking to Irene Pepperberg about Alex. And I'll say in advance, if you listen carefully, you will hear Alex talk. He doesn't sound at all like a parrot. He's going to sound very much like a human. He's very good at using language. But let's watch Alex the parrot answer some questions that are posed to him by his scientist, Irene Pepperberg. I'll pause for a moment. She's holding up a pair of keys in front of Alex to make sure you can see those, and the keys have different colors. So you heard that high-pitched, almost sound like a child talking, say two. That's actually the sound of Alex, that parrot talking. And he can see the keys in front of him held up by the scientist, Irene Pepperberg, and he says two. Let's keep going. And there she asked Alex what was different about the keys, and he said what was different was their color. And finally, we're going to have him look at some numbers. There you go. So she asked him quite a complex question. He sees all those numbers. She asked him which one is gray. And Alex looks at all those numbers and calls out the word four because the number four on that table is gray. So that's a pretty impressive use of language, right? He's listening to his scientist, Irene Pepperberg, and he's making simple responses, but responses that indicate that, he understands the questions that are coming to him. So just a fantastic demonstration of the possibilities of intelligence and even language use with a brain that's really different than ours, a bird brain. So how about under the sea? So now let's talk about whales. Now, in many ways, whales are quite different than us. They obviously live underwater. They're different than us in their intelligence. They do not have hands that they can use to manipulate the world or create tools. But there are tremendous examples of intelligence by whales, first in language. So we're going to talk briefly about three different types of whales. We'll talk about humpback whales. Humpback whales, as you may know, are known for this incredible whale song that they produce. This is typically sung by the males, and it has very complex melodic structure, and it's culturally transmitted. Young whales learn it from older whales, and if pods of whales come together, they can actually exchange songs, and one set of whales can learn the songs of another whale. So we'll hear an example of that in just a minute. Well, I also want to mention sperm whales. Now, these are a very different kind of whale. They actually are a hunt, and they hunt things like giant squid deep under the water. And they locate those squids by using echolocation. They make a very loud click, and they can hear the echo back to find out where things are. But it turns out that sperm whales actually have used those clicks not only for echolocation, but they have incredibly complex variation in how they use the clicks, which we definitely don't understand, but more and more scientists are starting to say has the structure of language. And finally, there's dolphins that use a very different sound. They actually make a whistling sound. And when they whistle, a little bit like elephants, there's evidence that they use those whistles for names for each other. So let's hear a few of those sounds just to see how complicated this is. So here's a humpback whale song. You hear that long, almost mournful, echoey sound. I'll put the water on top of that. So this is a humpback whale singing, and I chose this because we talked about art as an example of human intelligence, and we don't know why humpback whales sing yet. It's probably related to males looking to mate and to find female whales, but there's an incredible structure to it that almost seems like language, in the sense that some phrases are used more commonly than others. Now let's hear sperm whales, which sound quite a bit different. Here you're going to sound clicks, almost like Morse code. So very different than humpback whale songs, but right now scientists are trying to build artificial intelligence algorithms to try to figure out, hey, do those clicks refer to certain things that the sperm whale is encountering in the wild? And finally, here's dolphins who are communicating with a whole different sound, with this whistling sound. Let's hear it one more time. So again, just an incredible demonstration of variety of how these kinds of whales can communicate with each other. So again, maybe closer examples to language than we've seen in apes or birds so far, but so different than ours that we don't have an understanding of it yet. Now, whales are also incredibly complex predators, and being a predator requires a high level of intelligence. Humpback whales actually cooperatively hunt fish by creating bubble nets. They actually go underwater, they blow bubbles in a big circle, and then they herd fish into those nets. And the fish don't like to swim through the bubbles, so it's a way that a group of whales can coordinate to catch a large number of fish at once. And we will see a very brief video of it here. These are humpback whales off the coast of Alaska hunting together to blow bubbles to catch. You see the ring of bubbles? There's the ring of bubbles. So that's a pretty amazing example of intelligent behavior, cooperating, making a tool underwater, which in this case is bubbles, and using that to hunt the fish that they want. So now let's talk about the last animal, which is my personal favorite. Octopuses are probably the most alien form of intelligence that we have on Earth. They have an incredibly different brain than we do. They have a central brain, well, kind of like we do, which is used for visual processing. But then they have quite elaborate nervous systems in every single arm. It's almost like each tentacle has its own mini brain, and they operate really independently. And octopuses have a really different life than all of these other intelligent animals. They don't have social networks. They're very solitary animals, and they have very short lifespans. They only live for a year or two. So that's not very much time to get smart. But it turns out they are incredibly smart, and probably because they're both prey. They don't have a hard shell. They have to be smart to escape from the animals that eat them, but they're also very focused predators. So let's take a quick look at an amazing example of an octopus solving a problem here. So this octopus we're going to see is inside an aquarium, and the scientist has put a jar inside the aquarium with a crab inside of it, and the octopus is hungry and wants to eat the crab. An octopus generally doesn't find jars in the wild, but this octopus and many others have learned how to open up. See the crab on the left in the jar, and then there is the octopus coming towards it. She's going to use her tentacles. She's exploring. Oops, we can get rid of that. Sorry. She explores the jar with her tentacles. She's feeling her way around it. She's eating the crab, so she knows she can eat it, but she can only figure out this puzzle. Trying to figure out if she can get in from the outside. She's almost enveloping the whole top. Trying to figure out how to squeeze it and how to unravel it. And there she goes with all of her tentacles. She's taken off the top side. There's the top. It's fallen right off. She's going to go inside and grab that crab. We don't have to watch the last minute. But just like you or me figuring out how to open a complex jar in our kitchen, she's figured out how to do the same thing. So an amazing example of intelligence with a brain that's incredibly different than ours. So I'll wrap up here and just kind of ask the question, hey, what causes the development of intelligence in certain kind of animals over time? And the answer that scientists now have is that there are very different paths to intelligence. Some animals become intelligent because they live in complex environments that change with the season, and they have to be intelligent to keep up with the changing seasons. And elephants are a good example of that. They have to migrate a long way during different seasons in order to find food. Other animals become intelligent because they're either predator or prey. Like an octopus has to avoid dangerous creatures because it's so soft and doesn't have a shell. But other animals, like those whales that we saw, are predators, and they've developed intelligence because they have complex hunting strategy. Other animals have a complex social structure. If an animal lives in a group with a complex network of relatives and strangers, well, they need to have complex brains to maintain those social relationships. And they also need complex brains to keep track of who's trustworthy and who isn't. And this is often thought of as a path by which apes have become intelligent, although it's also clear that whales have this kind of intelligence. And finally, there's a kind of intelligence related to tool use. Animals that have limbs that can grasp and manipulate objects, like chimpanzees or even elephants, can use those tools to manipulate their environment, and getting smarter helps them choose and build better tools. And this is probably the kind of intelligence that's contributed most to our lives as humans, where because we have these incredibly complex hands, we've built these big brains so we can do amazing things with our hands, and we've become very intelligent as a result. So I'll loop back to Stephanie's poll question. All of these animals are quite intelligent, and I think what we do as scientists now is that there's just a lot of different ways to become intelligent as an animal on this earth. So, hey, what does this mean for you in brain health? Well, we're talking about brain health because, of course, we're here at BrainHQ and thinking about how to make humans have healthier brains. And so I'll just leave you with this thought. Intelligence means that you can adapt your behavior to a changing environment. You can solve new problems like that crow. Well, if you're adapting your behavior, that's the same as learning. And learning is based on brain change and brain plasticity. And of course, we want you to keep your brain learning, keep on changing your brain, and keep on training with BrainHQ. So I will stop my slides here and we will kick it over and have Midori join us. And let's talk a little bit about dog intelligence in particular.
So just to review, Midori Williams is a certified professional dog trainer via the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers, or CCPDT for short. They were formerly a behavior trainer for the San Francisco SPCA, where they worked with both dogs and cats, but they are now an independent certified fear-free dog trainer, walker, and pet sitter here in the Bay Area.
Fantastic. So, Midori, let's just dive in. I talked about everything except for dogs. So, tell us a little bit about dogs. What do you think the most common misconception is about dogs and how intelligent they are?
Yeah, I think for my point of view, the most common misconception is just that dogs have this kind of like fixed amount of time where they can learn. I think that in reality, it's like they're learning throughout their whole lives. They're very good at taking in the world around them and observing body language and observing different factors in the environment. And they definitely are continuously learning, even with just little small things in their day-to-day lives, not just during training sessions. So that's kind of like the big one that I think I've
A lot of
noticed.
people have heard the phrase, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks." Well, what do you think about that?
That's exactly like where that kind of misconception that came to mind came from. I was like, I feel like this is something that, especially before I started learning about dog behavior, I definitely was like, oh, like that must be true because it's so widely said, like, okay, the old dogs can't really learn new tricks. But in my opinion, old dogs definitely can learn new tricks. It's all about, what motivates the dog. So I can definitely see where that phrase came from. I do wonder if it's like more coming from an older dog may not have as much motivation to do stuff. They're more like, I want to be lazy. Like, why am I going to go after that treat? My joints hurt, like things that
Sure.
come with age. They may not want to learn something or be motivated to learn something. That doesn't mean they can't. It's just about finding what motivates them.
Here at BrainHQ, we often turn that statement on its head. Instead of saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, we say, hey, a dog or a person gets old when they stop learning new tricks. Because I think that
Mhm.
learning is the key to maintaining great health. So
Yeah.
share your opinion about dogs. So speaking of tricks, I think we've all seen dogs that don't seem like they learn anything, and we've seen dogs that can learn like a simple command, like maybe sit, and then
Mhm.
maybe we've watched the Westminster Dog Show and we see dogs like doing quite amazing sequences of activities. Like as someone who's involved in dog training, how do you build on a dog's learning? How do you push a dog as far as they can, if I may put it that way? And are some dogs just not capable of learning as complicated things?
Yeah, I think like you can definitely push any dog to learn more complex kind of like multi-step behaviors. It's all about kind of like meeting them where they are and kind of making it easy for them to learn. If you're throwing them into the full agility course from the very start and being like, well, why can't you get this? Then it's kind of not setting them up for success. So kind of taking it a couple steps back and being like, okay, let's break this down into smaller steps. And that can go for like just a simple behavior like sit too. Like some dogs are gonna like throw the butt down into the sit right away, no problem. Broken down a little bit more. Just depends on what that dog is feeling in that moment. Is there outside distractions and everything like that?
That's probably good
Sorry
advice
for
for
Linguistic, by the way.
There's probably good advice for learning and teaching just about anyone to break it
Yeah.
down into small steps and kind of meet them where they are. So good to know that just about any dog could probably learn to do a complex set of tricks. But dogs are obviously different. There's all kinds of different breeds, and some dogs, as a neuroscientist, I guess, have tiny little heads and tiny little brains, and some dogs, as a neuroscientist, seem to have big heads and pretty big brains. Do you think it's true that some breeds are smarter than others, or do you think it's all a matter of how well the dog has been taught?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of how the dog has been taught more so. I think, it goes back to that kind of like it depends what the dog is motivated by, right? Like some breeds, they have this drive to chase or to run
Mhm.
inherently, and they have kind of proclivity for that, but that may just be um one thing that motivates them. There may be other things that motivate them.
Yep.
So I think that that's kind of how I think about that.
So, no, their intelligence is probably very goal directed in that sense. They want a treat, or they want a pet, or they want affection. And in some ways,
Right.
leverage that. And so, we often think about different hierarchies of intelligence. So, a dog can learn to sit, or maybe it can learn to stay, or do a complex set of tricks. But in your opinion, like, do dogs understand things like cause and effect? Like, if you're working with a dog and the dog knocks a ball under a sofa, and then doesn't see it anymore. Do you think the dog understands how that happened, or do you think the dog can remember for a while that the ball has been hidden? You know, as a people who study child psychology, those are pretty big milestones in the development of a human child. When can a human child understand cause and effect, or when can a human child understand that if an object is hidden, it's still there and the kid might find it later? How well do dogs do on those kinds of scales?
Yeah, so this question I was a little bit stumped on initially. So I reached out to a former coworker who's a certified veterinary behaviorist, and to get her thoughts on it.
Yeah.
And what she let me know is that it just comes down to how dogs learn, which is by association. And so if they do push a ball out of sight under a couch, they're going to learn that pushing the ball towards the couch causes it to go out of sight. I don't know if that inherently means like, okay, they remember that it's there for a long period of time, but at least in the shorter term, because a lot of dogs thinking is more in the shorter term, they're probably going to remember that it's there, and try to do something to try and get it if they're motivated enough. It reminds me of this one dog that I used to know who really liked to take their ball and like push it under this like flat down to the floor bed that kind of is raised on little feet, and he would push it under and try and get it to bounce off the back wall to come
Oh,
back
wow.
out from under the bed so that they could chase it again.
So the dog
And if
wanted to
they
play
got
with
stuck, he would
himself.
put his paws underneath to try and get it out. So that
Right.
was really cool.
Well, that's a pretty good example. So, you know, I had the chance to share a lot of kind of wild and amazing stories about animal intelligence. How about you? What do you think the most amazing trick or activity you've seen a dog do that demonstrates how smart a dog can be? If you wanted to sell someone on, hey, dogs are pretty smart, like what's the most amazing thing you've seen a dog learn how to do across your time at the SPCA and your time as a dog trainer?
Yeah. I think for me, like the most kind of amazing thing about dogs that I've been coming to learn and like feel like I'm always learning about is their like ability to communicate through body language.
Oh.
So that's kind of one that really stuck out to me. Like
Hmm.
that is how dogs communicate with each other, is solely through body language. And so kind of learning that language and trying to understand it has been really like something I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
And a kind of one that came to mind was the all the different ways that a dog will ask you to pet them. Because you know, when like I before I got into behavior with dogs and like worked in a shelter setting, I was very much of the mindset, well, okay, the dog's like looking at me or like starting to move towards me. So that must mean that they want to get pet. And it's like a dog I've never met. But now I kind of like am able to take a step back and be like, okay, actually, like when dogs approach each other and they're strangers, the first thing they do is just sniff and like circle. Like that's their way of greeting. That's their handshake. They're
Hmm.
not going straight in for the hug with the stranger, right? Like they're not going straight for the physical contact.
Hmm.
So once I've gotten, you know, built bonds with dogs and started to get them more comfortable with me, I've seen dogs do things like nudge their nose under my hand or push their face between my arm and my side or lean their
Yep.
butt into my leg, and like just like all of these different ways that they like make it very clear that they want that physical contact is
Yeah.
so cool to me.
What's interesting about that for me as a neuroscientist as well is, you know, we know the dog wants something, the dog wants affection, but it's a real
Hmm.
sign of intelligence when an animal can recognize that it needs to manipulate another thinking being. In this case, it needs to manipulate a person in order
Right.
to have the dog get what they want, in this case, a pet or
Hmm.
affection. And that's a pretty interesting sign of intelligence because the dog realizes that not only do you have to take an action, but you need to be kind of coaxed into taking an action, right?
Right.
Training the dog, but I suppose the dog is perhaps training you at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty interesting example of two brains both working on their intelligence.
Hmm.
Well, let me ask you one last question, and then maybe Stephanie will have some questions from the audience for us. I'll just put it to you straight, Midori. Dogs or cats? Which ones are smarter?
Ooh, that's a good question. I feel like I might say cats, because I feel like cats have a little bit more you know, instinct to survive, and they kind of use more intelligence to get towards that survival mode. But I mean, dogs have that too.
I think I love your answer, and I'll come back to my talk and say, hey, they're intelligent in really different ways, right? Dogs have
Exactly.
really been trained and really evolved over hundreds, if not thousands of years to help humans, right? Almost every dog breed has got a task that hundreds or thousands of years ago people wanted it to do, right? To hunt in the water or to fetch things out of, holes. And so dogs are intelligent in that they can understand us, I think, and figure out what we want. Cats, like you say, are survivors, right? They're not here to help us in any way. Every cat owner knows that, but they're very intelligent in that they have 9 lives and they figured out how to get through this world. So, and I'm saying that as a cat owner. Stephanie, do we have some questions from our audience we should take? And we might go a minute or two long if that's okay with you, Midori. My slides went a little bit longer than I meant them to because I had so many cool videos of animals doing cool things. But if we have some questions, I'm happy to take them, and Midori as well.
Yeah,
Totally fine.
absolutely. Great. Okay, so our first question is coming to us from Harold, and Harold was asking, are there any studies that you're aware of that relate the size of an animal's brain to its total size? And then also to sort of tag on to that for maybe Midori, does the size of a dog brain relate to how intelligent it may be? Like, is a Chihuahua going to be potentially less intelligent than a larger breed, like a Saint Bernard or a Newfie, for example?
Yeah. Well, I'll take the broad question first, then we'll kick it to Midori. There's long been the argument that it's not so much brain size that matters, but it's how big the brain is relative to the body. And, the idea, I think, historically was, hey, a whale might have a really big brain, but it's got an enormous body. And so maybe that brain doesn't mean that it's very intelligent. I've never really understood that argument as a brain scientist. I think the history of animal intelligence is littered with scientists trying to come up with ways that we can keep humans on top. And there's always kind of one more hoop we're willing to put in the way of an animal so we can be sure we're the smartest. So we have very big brains, but now we've decided, well, it's really the ratio of the brain to the body size. And when you do that ratio, humans turn out really well, although some kinds of mice turn out very well on that ratio as well. I don't really get it as a neuroscientist. If we think the brain generates behavior and perhaps intelligence and perhaps even self-awareness and consciousness, it seems reasonable to me that the bigger brain you had, and in particular, if you had a lot of neurons in your brain, and in particular, if those brain cells were communicating with each other, I would think you would end up with a pretty intelligent animal. So that's one scientist's opinion on that. How about you, Midori? Are Saint Bernards smarter than Chihuahuas?
Yeah, I can't say that I know for sure. Like I almost, my first thought was the brain ratio to size of body, but I don't know like what the ratios are between those small dog breeds and the large dog breeds. I think it really comes down to more like their upbringing, like what happened when they were puppies, when they were nursing with their mom.
Yep.
Because I know like that can have like whatever the mom's kind of genetic disposition and also stress levels can have an effect on the dog.
Yep.
Or on the puppies.
Yep.
So I think that's more what I would think of.
I agree with you. I think those ratios are probably pretty much the same from small dogs to big dogs. And I think a well-trained Chihuahua is going to be way ahead of a not well-trained Saint Bernard. Great question. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie.
All right. I have an interesting question from Leland, and I might need to provide a little bit of context for this one.
Okay.
Looking at Alex the Gray Parrot, Leland says, Clever Hans comes to mind. Could Alex the Parrot be reading body language as Hans did? Now,
Yeah.
Clever Hans, I had to look this up, was a horse end of the 1800s, early 1900s, who could apparently do arithmetic. And it turns out that it wasn't a horse doing math. It was a horse reacting to how its trainer was interpreting the horse.
That's exactly right. So what Clever Hans the horse did is the trainer would say, what's 2 + 4? And Hans would sort of stomp. and get to 6. And everyone thought, well, this horse can do math. But it turns out that Hans, a little bit like the dogs Midori is talking about, got really good at observing its trainer. And when Hans had stomped 6 times, the trainer would change their stance a little bit, and Hans would notice that and stop stomping. And it's not even clear that the trainer meant to be indicating to Hans this way. But it illustrates a real problem with animal language, which is, hey, we have to spend a long time with an animal and develop a bond with it to test its linguistic abilities. But in developing that bond, maybe you're giving some hints and cues that you didn't mean to. So it's a great question. In the case of Washoe, that chimpanzee who learned sign language, scientists actually asked this very carefully. The way they defined if Washoe knew a particular sign in sign language is they had video of Washoe that was actually examined by another scientist, not the scientist who was involved in training him. And Washoe had to use the sign 15 times in a row over the course of 15 days for the consensus to be made that Washoe had learned the sign. So that's a pretty rigorous definition. But we do have those challenges, Coco gorilla, that's a very controversial case. And many people, I think, believe that the scientist who was working with Coco, probably because she loved Coco very much, was maybe overinterpreting some of the combinations of signs that Coco put together. Alex the gray parrot, another wonderful example. Again, Irene Pepperberg had to work with him for years and years and years and years. But again, a lot of the scientific papers that were published around Alex were published by videoing Alex and making a judgment about what answers Alex was providing, even if Irene Pepperberg wasn't part of the analysis or part of the video. That being said, I think it's fair to say that an interesting challenge with Alex in that work is, hey, only 1 or 2 parrots have really been trained this extensively over the years. And if we really want to believe that gray parrots have this language ability, I think as a scientist, we might like to see, hey, can we train lots of parrots to do this? Because that would be very exciting. Alex is a very unique parrot. So, Midori, have you seen this with dogs, that they can respond to you even though you're maybe, cueing them in some way? I guess we're pretty good at showing dogs what we want them to do, aren't we?
Yeah, so I think it can be very easy to accidentally associate a cue that you're hoping a dog is understanding with like a verbal cue, so like sit or down, and you're accidentally actually building it to be stronger with like a visual cue, like, oh, like holding it above, or like, so that is one thing that I'm always like, I have in the back of my head, like, okay, yeah, we want to start with that visual cue with the treat, but eventually kind of phasing that out because ultimately the goal for training is to be verbally cueing.
Right.
So it's
Right.
all kind of like, you got to
Yeah.
think about all of the factors.
In that sense, animals are extremely smart, but sometimes not in quite the way we want them to be. Wonderful question, Stephanie. Thank you.
All right, I think let's do one more question and then move to wrapping up here because we are going a little bit over time. So we had a couple of people talk about, like Midori was saying, about nonverbal, I mean, obviously nonverbal communication between dogs and people, but having to do with body language. And also, we had a question come in previously, and also it looks like the user is here in the chat now. Midori, can you speak to whether or not dogs can like learn sign language or learn what different kinds of signs mean, and how to sort of associate those? Is that something that are they actually comprehending what you are signing to them, or is it just sort of like an association, like with that ball under the couch, what that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah. So I actually have a little bit of experience with this because there were a couple of dogs that were deaf in the shelter. So we created like a little pamphlet for the fronts of their kennels so that people could know what their sign language cues were. So for sit, down, stay, like just the basics, like 8 or so cues. And I would say that that is very similar to the verbal cue, like we're teaching them an association. So associating when you do this behavior and it's connected to this cue, you are going to get a treat or you are going to get something that is rewarding to you. That's how dogs learn new behaviors. That is all based in association. I can't speak to if there is like a level of comprehension. I mean, I would like to think so. Like they understand that this is what you're seeking from them, but I think it's mainly association based.
Got it.
Fantastic. That's amazing to have taught a deaf
Yeah.
dog how to do those things.
I've definitely seen dogs respond to sign language. That's really cool.
Yeah, as the owner of a dog who is starting to lose his hearing, I might actually reach out to you a little bit about how to work with him on that. Um, all right, so I think let's go ahead and wrap it up here. I do want to share a slide with some contact information for Midori in case any of you are in the Bay Area and are interested in enlisting their services. Like we mentioned, they do private dog training, dog walking, and in-home pet sitting in the Bay Area. And they also have a rover profile. And if you use that QR code or that link, you, I believe, get a credit towards that service. Is that right, Midori?
Yes, I believe if you scan, it said that there was a credit if you scan the QR code specifically.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so if any of you in the area are interested in any of those services, Midori seems like a wonderful person and a very I was going to say well-trained trainer,
Dogs
a
have trained you well,
certified
haven't they,
dog
Midori?
trainer. And I'll leave that on the screen for a minute while I kind of go through the rest of the outro here, just in case anybody needs to take down that info. But I wanted to thank everybody today so much for participating, both to our audience, especially those of you who are asking questions, and also to our speakers today, Henry and Midori. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all this wonderful knowledge with all of us.
Super. And I want to thank everyone for joining. And if you want to make sure your brain stays sharp and healthy, so you're as smart as a crow or a whale or an elephant or maybe even an octopus, everyone here is part of BrainHQ. And I encourage you right after this webinar, go to BrainHQ at www.brainhq.com, log in, do some brain training, sharpen that brain, and stay brain healthy and stay smart. Thanks everyone for joining. Midori, thank you for joining us today. And Stephanie, thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, of course. For those of you who are interested in our next or upcoming webinars, next month we are doing an office hours webinar called All About the Memory Exercises. That'll be taking place on September 17th. And then our next BrainHQ Academy webinar is Trick or Cheat, How Magic and Illusions Can Fool Our Brains. And that's going to be October 15th. So looking forward to both of those. I think that's going to wrap it up here. So thank you all again so much. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Midori. And thank you again, everybody, for attending. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, folks. Happy brain training.
Thank you so much.